Chapter 10 Daring Journey. In a shrill, urgent voice, Cockless asked again, "Who is the other man?" Colin watched from his hiding place. Hubert plunked his tankard on the counter. "His name? I don't quite remember." Cockless filled Hubert's tankard from his crock. "Where could I find him? It's very important." Hubert dropped his head on his arms. His hand dropped away from the tankard. Cockless grunted in annoyance, gave Hubert a shake, then turned to the new printer. Colin watched Cockless pass a coin to the man, who eyed it, bit it, and put it in his pocket. "All right, what else did you find out?" Cockless asked. "All I know is that the Englishmen, or rather the two of them, which I don't know, they're here before daybreak, and sometimes after dark. What they do in the middle of the day, I know not. You must indeed be an early riser to catch them. Let me see these corduroy sheets." Cockless moved toward the composing room. Hubert sat up, his body tense. "No one is allowed back there." "Well then, just tell me how many copies of the New Testament you're printing." 3,000, Hubert said. Cockless sucked in his breath. "And where does the money come from for all this?" "Why, sir, the English merchants." Hubert slumped over again. His noisy breathing filled the shop. For one fierce split second, Colin thought Cockless was coming into the composing section. But the little snub-nosed man hesitated and then left the shop, followed by the new printer. Colin waited a few minutes before running home to tell Tyndale what had happened. The next day, Roy left to find out what he could from Cockless. For several days, he came back without news. One afternoon, he flung himself into the room, his step jaunty, and a wide grin showing all of his teeth. "I found out all about Cockless," he said, and began to chant. "A little, pratty, foolish boy, and though his stature be quite small, I've heard men say he lacks no gall, more venomous than any toad." Tyndale frowned and laid down his pen. "I have news, such news." Roy capered about the room. "Cockless has told Herman Rinke, he's an important senator here in Cologne, all about the English New Testament. Rinke didn't believe it at first, but he planted a spy in the shop." Colin grunted. This time, for once, he had been right about the spy. Tyndale jumped up. "The church sets its spies on me in earnest, ravening wolves, robbing the soul of men of the bread of life. Yet God will not abandon me. Is it not his word that is imperiled? We must leave Cologne. We'll gather up what has been printed and leave secretly tonight." At the printing shop there was a strange quiet. Men huddled together in the composing room, talking in low tones. Peter Quintel greeted Tyndale with such a subdued air that Colin knew something was dreadfully wrong. "Gentlemen, I regret an order came from the Senate this very afternoon to stop printing the English New Testament." "It was to be expected," William Tyndale said. "I will pay you what I owe you and take the corduroy sheets that have been printed and go to some other city." The printers looked at each other. "I appreciate your sympathetic interest," Tyndale said. "I am not dismayed. God is with me on this undertaking. If you will be so good as to bind the sheets together so that we may carry them, we will leave right away so that the shop will not be under suspicion." No one moved. The quietness became oppressive. I do not know how to tell you, Peter Quintel began. You see, when the officers brought the orders, they. He stopped and looked away. They confiscated the printed sheets, Tyndale finished. Colin felt a sickening hollowness. This news meant that all the work of printing would have to be begun again. He looked at William Tyndale. How could he face such discouragement? But Tyndale stood with eyes closed, his face calm, almost serene. Colin felt ashamed of his own despair. What right had he to feel anything except the courage Tyndale showed at every misfortune? Peter Quintel went on. There was nothing I could do. Resistance would mean closing the shop and putting all these men out of work. Tyndale took out his money bag. I quite understand. You did the only possible thing under the circumstances. Kindly let me know what I owe you. When the bill was settled, Colin followed Tyndale and Roy out of the shop. It was almost dusk. Colin heard running footsteps and turned. The apprentice ran up to him, holding something under his work apron. Here, he said, holding out some printed sheets. I saved these. There are 10 corduroy sheets. That's all I could manage. Don't tell anyone at the shop about this, will you? I hope your master finds some place to get his New Testament printed. The apprentice waved goodbye and hurried away. Colin showed Tyndale the corduroy sheets. Tyndale's look of radiant gratitude brought a lump in Colin's throat. Not all is lost, Tyndale said. But how are we going to leave Cologne? The city gates will be watched. The hot breath of the church is at our very heels. The question was a serious one. Back at their lodgings, Colin started to pack. Roy stood at the window looking at the street below. He began to chuckle. Colin, indignant at Roy's lack of seriousness, ran to see what had amused the ex-monk. Below, a group of boys seized one of their companions. With shouts of laughter, the others clipped the boy's hair into a monk's tonsure. The boy laughed with the others, folded his arms, and walked with slow steps, imitating a monk. The group moved down the street, laughing and talking. What are they doing? Colin asked. Roy whirled around and clasped his hands. It means there's a church procession today. It means there's a way we can leave the city under the officials' very noses. Colin was certain Roy had lost his senses. Tyndale did not even reply to Roy's remarks. But don't you see? Roy asked. We'll become part of the procession and march right out of the city gates. Leave everything to me. He slipped on his monk's robe. Wait here. Later, Roy returned with several bundles under his arm. Don't ask me any questions about where I got these. Needless to say, I haven't been a monk without learning a thing or two. He pulled out a choir boy's robe and a long brown gown and a pair of scissors. You first, my boy, he said to Colin. A few minutes later, Colin ran his fingers over the band of hair circling his head. Roy stood back and eyed his handiwork. Not that boys your age usually have a tonsure, but people will realize it was a boyish prank played on you by some of your friends. Just like those boys this afternoon. It's quite a usual thing before a procession. Roy waved the scissors over Tyndale's head. Now you, sir. Tyndale hesitated. Roy looked offended. You said yourself that all the city gates will be watched. Do you want that toad of a Cockless to throw you into prison? Did I tell you what Senator Runke told the Senate? Roy waved the scissors again. Seize the heretic who troubles England as Luther troubled Germany. With an excitement, Tyndale peeled off his tight black cap. In a short time, he too had a circle of hair like a monk's. Now it's my turn. Roy handed the scissors to Tyndale, who hesitated once more. I've never cut hair, he said. Do you want the New Testament in the hands of Englishmen? Roy reminded him. I forgot to tell you that Cockless is writing to King Henry and to Cardinal Wolsey about your work. Tyndale began snipping off Roy's hair in a circular band. When he was through, he stepped back, just as Roy had done to him. It's a little one-sided, he said. Your halo has slipped a little. He laid the scissors down. What next? Roy taught Tyndale and Colin how to walk without body motion. He placed the ball of his foot on the floor and let his heel settle into place. The three marched around and around while Roy chanted Latin. Next, Roy opened one of the bundles and brought out a satin pillow and carved wooden box. Tyndale's handwritten manuscript of the New Testament fit into it. Roy fastened the box with pillow cords. Now, when you put on your robes, we'll wait until the church procession passes the house. Then we will slip into line and keep marching past the cathedral and out the city gates. I think I'll think up some good reason by that time to tell the guards. Tyndale agreed that the plan, although daring, was good. He began to pile up his books, ready to take. You can't carry those, Roy said. The only belongings any of us can take are what we can wear under the robes. That's a great deal, I know. I've had a lot of practice. Colin and Tyndale put on all the clothes they could. Colin remembered the corduroy sheets. What about these? He asked. The three stared at one another. There was no room in the wooden box. Corduroy sheets could not be carried by hand. Wrap them around me, Colin suggested. Tyndale and Roy placed the corduroy sheets around Colin's waist and bound them with a cord. Colin moved stiffly, his arms held out at his sides. He could not bend or sit. Roy handed him a wax taper. Here, you must carry this when you go outside. Where are we going when we leave Cologne? Colin asked. We'll go to Worms, Tyndale said. Quintel mentioned a printer there, Peter Schoeffer. He is a son of an associate of Gutenberg. I wonder if Gutenberg had as much trouble with his Bible as I'm having. Roy started to reply, then stopped. Chanting sounded far down the street. The three tiptoed down the stairs, dressed in robes. Tyndale left money and a note on the table for the landlady. Outside, Colin felt tense and yet curiously light-headed, as if he walked in a dream. The corduroy sheets pricked him if he moved too quickly. He could hear the church procession coming closer. Chanting swelled and diminished. Then he saw the banners of satin embroidered with gold thread. One man carried a huge wooden cross. Other men carried relics on satin pillows. Still others held tapers high. Townspeople walked at a respectful distance behind the relic bearers. Roy lit Colin's taper and gave him a nudge. Fall into line, he whispered. Colin stepped into the line of procession, with Tyndale right behind, bearing the boxed manuscript of the English New Testament on the satin pillow. Colin held his taper in front of him and tried to remember to walk in the easy, flowing ripple of the churchmen ahead of him. He was just beginning to feel at ease when from one of the houses lining the street a child called from a doorway to someone in the group of people behind Colin. "Mother! There's Mother!" The child ran into the street with open arms. Colin heard a woman behind him call out, "No, no, Hans, you must go back to the house." There was a flurry of movement. Colin guessed that the mother had given her child a push. Then Tyndale exclaimed. In the next instant, the wooden box sailed past Colin's face and crashed on the cobbled streets. The leaves of Tyndale's English scriptures scattered in all directions for everyone to see.